lovely ladies and listeners. Welcome back. We were just having some technical issues. Not that late, but we'll make it work. Good evening, Poe. How are you?
Hey, everyone. Hey, buddy.
So casual. Love it. Turtle, how you doing? Nice picture, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm doing fine, Zori. I'm the cause of the delay. It is my mistake. I thoroughly apologize for that.
Not a problem. We're here now. Tonight's topic, was brought about from last week's Wamen. We passed a couple of comments on the church, and it would seem we all have varying opinions and feelings about the church in general. And I've not really specified exactly what we're going to be talking about when it comes to the church. I kind of just want to put the feelers out because I feel like we're gonna end up down some rabbit holes here, I think. Yes. But I will openly start out by saying that I'm not a devout Christian. I do go to church when I'm invited to, or if I'm going to an event or going to something that my husband is involved in. I do not make a habit of going to church every Sunday. So I'm quite open with that. I have quite a relaxed sort of relationship with the church, I suppose, but I do have some stories behind as to why that is, but we'll bring that up later. Poe and or Turtle, do either of you want to jump in and say your kind of situation with the church, I suppose? Are you Christians? Are you not? Do you go to church? What's the deal?
I am a practicing Catholic, and I go to church every Sunday.
Cool. I can jump in on there if you like. I've been going to church for the last 2 years, maybe 3 years actually, and I still kind of struggle with the faith aspect of it, but I very much believe in the practice of it. So I believe that the actual act of going to church is good for me, and it's good for the community, and it's good for the church. But I still struggle with whether I'm actually a Christian or not for the kind of more belief reasons.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I've definitely always had issues with the belief side of it. As you said, I do find it quite difficult sometimes to believe in one being. I have mentioned before, not only to people in person, but on this stream as well, that I do tend to lean more towards the pagan side of things. So I'm more believing in more than one being, should we call it, and more spiritually leaning towards that way instead of one almighty, should we say. I do enjoy going to church when I do, but sorry, we're having technical issues with Turtle again, so apologize for the typing in the background.
Do you want me to talk about the video I made? I was just trying to find it. I think it was in 2022. I made a video. I like to give my videos like cheeky titles. It was called it's called "If You Don't Go to Church, You Ain't Conservative." Only because at the time, I don't know if you remember this, Joe Biden. It was like here we go. Yeah, 2022. Joe Biden said, "If you're not sure whether you're for Trump or for me, you ain't black." He was speaking to the black community. So that was kind of I guess a timely reference, but not so timely anymore. And the video that I made about going to church was to point out that if you're English or British, then probably your parents, or certainly your grandparents and great-grandparents, would have thought it was completely ordinary to go to church every week, even if you weren't really like a practicing Christian. If you weren't a God-fearing man, as they say, it was just like a normal thing to go to church, just like we consider it normal to get married in a church, or even to go to church on Christmas Day, perhaps, which even that isn't that normal anymore, to be honest, those examples. But I think for them, it was just a habit, and it was a thing everyone did, and you put on your best clothes and your best shoes, and the ladies would wear a hat. and that's just what you did. And if you didn't do that, it was a kind of strange thing to do or to not do. So I think the practice of it has fallen out of it's fallen out of style, to the point where now the only people who go to church are really religious people whose religion sort of tells them to go to church, because society no longer tells people to go to church, if that makes sense. So I think that I think to be conservative politically is, of course, monetary policy and all kinds of things that we consider political, but to be conservative sort of spiritually, or to be reactionary, certainly, is to look to what our ancestors did. And I'm talking about our relatively near ancestors, not pagan ancestors like you like you follow, and to and to see what worked about previous generations who lived in circumstances that are not that dissimilar from how we live. I think, even though we like to think that we live such different lives, the truth is that they weren't that different from us, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see it from a smaller sort of community side of things, in terms of, it's very common in our village, for instance, to go to church on Christmas and, well, any other Christian holiday. The whole village comes together, and you do tend to see people who you wouldn't even realize that they did go to church. You bump into them and think, well, I saw you out on dog walk, and I didn't even realize you went to church. And they kind of have the same attitude as like you say, Poe. It used to be part of life. It's something that you just did. It was very ordinary. You just went to church on a Sunday, you wore your Sunday best. It was kind of like it was part of your life. You did it at the end of the week in my head, you kind of went to church to kind of symbolize the end of the week, but also show the beginning of a new week. So you're going to, worship God and bring joy to the world, and whatever it may be. But I do think now it is, and I've mentioned it before, but it is very much a community thing, going to church now. And I've said it before to people who want to get involved in their communities as well, whether you are or you aren't Christian or religious in any way, going to your local church is a great way to get involved in your community. And 90% of the time, they will not turn you away for not being Christian. But if you want to help out in the community, or want to know more about various clubs or groups, or if you want to help out with anything, get involved, get your foot in the door, as it were, the church is 9 times out of 10 the best place to go. They know everything there is to know about the community and who to talk to. But that was normal. You went to church, you spoke to your friends, you spoke to your neighbors, and now we've lost so much of that. And although you say, our more recent ancestors, we're not as different to them as maybe we think we are, I do think we've lost a lot of what they did in terms of, going to church, it being part of a daily life and being part of your local groups, your local community, because that's just what you did. You volunteered, you helped out. If your neighbor said, oh, can I have some help with a charity gig I'm running, you just go and help. Now people aren't so inclined to do that. The church groups that we're involved in, and just groups in general in the community, are getting smaller and smaller, and you tend to find that it's the same number of people. It's always the same faces that pop up in any community. You can go to any community and you will see the same 10-15 people doing absolutely everything, being head of those groups.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. And they usually are, dare I say the word, boomers. They are boomers.
Yeah, that's one thing they got right, is volunteer work. No, I think you're correct, and they're often involved in the church as well, which is how you kind of end up meeting these people. And it's so much easier to join a group when you know even one person, even if you're not great friends with them. Like, you just know their name, they know you, like they know why you're there. It's so much less daunting to join a new group if you know even just one person. In the video that I made about it, I wanted to emphasize that I don't know how you experience church, Helen, and but it sounded like you've been to a few kind of more stuck-up churches. But in my video, I recommended that people, if they didn't know if they weren't sure about Christianity or church, like they could just go to the services and they wouldn't even have to sing or get communion or like listen to the sermon. Like they could just sit there and read the Bible or read a book and, you know, just to kind of dip their toe in it. And I got a few comments from people saying that this would be like extremely embarrassing and people would like tut at them if they tried to go to church and not get kind of involved. I don't know what you think about that, Helen.
Well, I think that really depends on the purpose of why someone is sitting there in the first place. If they're going just to get comfortable with the idea of going to church, and like you said, the formality of it, the sort of like the past social expectation of like you just go to church, that's perfectly fine. And usually most churches, I find, after mass, they have like a coffee and donut social somewhere in the parish hall or whatever if they wanted to mingle and talk to people. But if it's a matter of deepening your faith, that is something I think even going to church a million times cannot do. It's really a personal act done privately, day to day. Let's see. Well, I'm a convert and I became Catholic when I was 19, and that's when I really started going to church every Sunday. And I think the worst part about going to church for me is the formality that I'm expected to go. And I always find going to church is laden with a lot of social pressure. I've had old women tug on my shoulders because they didn't think I was sitting up properly. I've had mostly women. Men tend to mind their business, I find, with these sorts of things. I had women pull on my blouse saying it's too low. I had another woman pull on my skirt, thinking that it was down to my knees. She thought it was, like I have these boomer biddies were always harassing me regarding how I looked, how I act, and it ceased to become worshiping God and everything to do with showing up to, to live up to the expectations of the stiff people around me. And I still feel that whenever I go to church. I really go because my religion is asking me to, and I believe in God. And I sometimes feel like going to church is a necessary evil, having to deal with the people around me. And most people who go to church these days don't know anybody. They're not in small communities. They're often large churches. Most people have become really unfriendly, not welcoming. Like you mentioned, it's usually the 10, 15 people that are there all the time. I left Canada for 5 years, came back, same people in charge of everything, like the same small cluster, you say boomers. So it's hard for people to socially integrate themselves into church. And I feel like I'd have to cut off my limbs to fit the expectations of a lot of people who go to church. But
do you think that's a Catholic thing? I mean, I know Catholics are kind of known for maybe being more strict or sort of a Catholic school kind of mentality. But yeah, I mean, that that's kind of unfamiliar for, I don't know about Birdie, but for me, I've never really been to a Catholic church. So I guess like a lot of the churches I go to, they're just really grateful that there is someone there. Like, oh, like you're young and you're interested in coming to church. Like, that's really great that you're here.
Yeah, I've had it from both sides, to be honest. I've had larger churches, and such as the one that we got married in. That's huge compared to the congregation at our own church. But I actually found that the larger church was way more inviting in a way, because you don't feel like you're being watched as much, because there's a bigger sort of mix and group of people there, and the faces do tend to change because it's quite a sort of busy town. So you do tend to get people sort of coming in and going. But in the village church, I do remember when we first started going, it was, oh, are you on holiday? Oh, are you visiting? And they still say that in the big church, and it's like, no, I'm local. I've been here my whole life. And it did get to a point where I got so fed up that I just started turning around and saying no, because they were sort of staring. And Helen, I'm sorry to hear that in your shirt and things. That would really wind me up, and I probably wouldn't step back in the church if they did that to me. But I've never had anybody comment on my clothes, but I have had. So I don't ever go up for communion. I never have, probably never will. And my husband does. So whenever he goes up for communion, I'm sat sort of waiting. I'm quite happy just sort of sitting there looking at the artwork or building or listening to the music. I'm quite content doing that. But the amount of people who have come up to me and said, oh, you can just go up for a blessing if you want. Oh, you could just do this. Oh, why don't you just do this? And I kind of sit there and I'm thinking, just leave me alone. You want to come to church to feel calm. in my head. You know, I don't go to church to feel lively and jumpy, and you know, I want to go to relax and to actually be able to breathe. And sometimes I'm not able to do that because I feel like I'm being watched. I feel like I'm being judged. And I do feel like, as you know, as I said a minute ago, I think we all agree, if it is the same sort of group of people and they are the older generation, it is a bit of a clique. And if you suddenly go into their clique, it's like, oh no, we don't want this person. And it took a while for the church in our village to kind of not accept us, but relax a bit, I think is the right word, around us. And they always say that it's so lovely to see me there, and you know, I don't go half as much as my other half does. So when I do turn up, it is nice to be welcomed whenever I do. But that only really started happening when they started seeing me in the village doing other things. So they'd sort of see me out and about, and then because I knew them from church, we'd sort of say hello and pass each other by. But they stopped asking why I wasn't going to church, which I felt a massive weight off my shoulders. You know, actually getting to the point where you can go to church when you want to, especially because I think this is completely different between myself and you, Turtle. I don't know about you, Poe, but being able to choose when you want to go to church compared to feeling as though your religion is calling you to go to church, I think there is a big divide there. And having the church and the people in the church themselves actually accept those choices, I think is a really big thing, because, you know, not being able to feel like you have that choice, I think is a big reason as to why people don't go to church anymore. They feel either pressured into going, and once they do go, it's like, oh no, we've grabbed you, you have to stay. When actually, is it not entirely down to you?
Mm-hmm. It ought to be entirely down to you. However, because of the Catholic teaching, if you miss Sunday Mass without having a really good reason, you cannot receive communion, and you have to go to confession and confess that you've missed Mass. So, like, it is supposed to be the number one priority on that day. And that's caused a lot of stress for me, especially as a mom of a young child who really does not like going to church and makes life hell if you try to bring him to church. So, again, that really adds to there's the pressure on my conscience, and then there's the social pressure of the people around me. And I don't see how any of that really brings me closer to God. I do see how discipline, behavior can bring you closer to God, but that's sort of negative pressure. And I almost feel like it's negative, a kind of negative reinforcement as well. If you don't go, it's not very fruitful.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like that's more of it feels more sort of oppressive now? That's quite a strong word to use, but because as Poe mentioned earlier, it used to be part of life. You used to go to church as a weekly routine, if not more than once a week. But we also used to have more time on Sundays. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers, but back in the day, when shops used to close early on a Sunday. Now, the whole reason behind that was because you went to church. You know, so the shops would either close early on a Sunday, wouldn't be open at all, or they'd open after church hours. So you went to your morning mass and then the shops would open. Or it was the opposite. They'd close before morning mass. So do we feel like those sort of ideals, as it were, that what you were just mentioning, Helen, is something that we would be a little bit more used to if we turn back the clock, 20, 30 years, instead of now where Sundays we're always busy. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. People work on Sundays now. People, women have their children. They might not want to go to church. There's not as much access to children's church groups as there used to be. We don't have as much choice in what we can and can't do with our time as we did back then.
Yeah, that's true. If society was really built around helping people attend church, it would make it a lot easier. But now Sundays just feel like an ordinary weekday with how busy things are. And usually that's an opportunity for parents to take their kids to, soccer practice or piano lessons or something, or even just spending time with your spouse, because you don't see your spouse at all during the week because of work. So
I get a lot of birthday party invitations for my kids on a Sunday now, which like the main reason I have to miss church now is because there's like a birthday party that I don't want my kids to miss out on. Because people, it's just like, it's just another weekend day. Like this is a day for a party. And sorry, go on.
No, I totally hear you. Same with my son too. Like children's events usually happen on weekends because weekdays are just packed with
Yeah.
school and what have you. Well, however, I just discovered with the church that if you have young children, the Catholic Church, if you have young children and taking them to church would be like a real big pain, a real disruptive pain, you're actually you're allowed to stay home that day to look after your child rather than go to church. So the obligation is lifted. And what I really upset about is that no one taught me that. It was you have to be on your deathbed to miss church.
Yeah.
So now I'm taking that, liberally because my son, he's a bit on the spectrum and he can't sit still for an hour and, and he's very noisy, very disruptive to the point where going to church with him it's not his fault. He's a very little boy, but it was agony. People would look at you and my son hated it and I couldn't focus. And, so a canon lawyer on, X of all places explained that it's okay to not go to church if your child is being too disruptive or not, so that was helpful. But other than that, yeah, back to the weekends. Weekends, like I said, meant feel way more like weekdays, and it's hard to take the time to go to church when there's so much going on around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had to look into this because I was weirdly I was doing research for a novel where I wanted to see what the typical opening hours for this the shop might have been in 2001 when the novel was set. And there was the Labour changed the law in the UK. So there used to be, now I want to get this right. So there used to be a complete prohibition on shops above a certain size being open for more than a certain number of hours a day. And Birdie, I don't know if you had the same experience with this turtle in America, but Birdie, you might remember that at a certain point, probably in your teen years, I don't know exactly how old you are, but like early teen years, there was the phenomenon of the mini Tesco and the mini Sainsbury's and the mini mini Waitrose, like the mini supermarkets that opened up. And they were actually I didn't realize this until I researched it for the novel, but these were in responses to basically to the Sunday prohibitions, because the large shops could not open for more than 4 hours a day on Sundays. But when they alleviated the law a little bit, so the shops that were under a certain size could open for like 12 hours a day on a Sunday, like a cost cutter or a I don't know, like your local news agent, it might be open until 11 on a Sunday. That's pretty typical now because it's below a certain size that there's no limit on it. So that's just one thing that makes Sunday a lot more like a Saturday. Is I think a lot of businesses still pay employees more, or they have to pay them more on Sundays because it's like making them work on Christmas, but not as drastic.
Yeah, a lot of them don't now, Poe, which again completely corresponds to what we've been saying. Is a lot of businesses now just treat it as another day. It's not a Sunday. It's just another weekday. So they just pay them the same. Especially it's the same, with my job. It's just another day. But I don't know if this is common up and down the country, but it has been certainly in where I've lived, that although there was that law that was, as you said, passed for the shops under a certain size could be open longer, we actually found that, especially in the villages, in some in the town, I suppose, as well, that the smaller shops were actually the ones to stay closed. So they'd open until midday, and then they'd close. I mean, the common one is the post office. I mean, that's always been a Sunday hours cut-off time sort of thing. We just don't bother going to the post office on a Sunday because it's basically not open. But even
try getting a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment on a Sunday. It's like these heavily unionized businesses do not open on Sundays.
Yeah, it's frustrating. If I needed to get a doctor's appointment, I say, "Oh, can I have one for a Saturday?" I said, "Oh no, we don't do doctor's appointments on Saturdays anymore." Was the last phone call I had, which is absolutely ridiculous. Because they're just like, "Oh well, people work," and I'm like, "Yeah, they do. So why, take the middle of the week off? I don't care." But there's so many people, like myself and like so many others I know, especially if you've got kids that go to school. If you need a doctor's appointment, You'd rather go on a Saturday or a Sunday than take them out of school, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. But
it's just the unions. Like they've got really powerful unions, basically. Like these, the same reason there's no school on Sundays. It's like these businesses that have. I'm going off topic here, but that's that's the reason why some places, Tesco cashiers do not have a good union. I don't know if there's a union at all for Tesco cashiers, but they are not very good at lobbying for themselves. And like these, basically once a union has got their claws in and put their foot down, like we don't want to work on Sundays, like you will basically never get that profession to work on a Sunday
just
unless you start importing foreign workers to do that job.
Yeah, you just have to accept it and get on with it. But jumping back slightly to the children in church, I've always found this interesting because the church in our village, there aren't really any really young children that attend it, but the church in town, there's loads, but they have a couple of areas for them specifically because it's a bigger church. They can accommodate for that. So whenever there's children, there's always a team of the church wardens and volunteers who go and kind of sit with the children whilst the parents are attending the service or mass or whatever it is they may be attending, so that the parents can be present in the moment, as it were. And this is completely free. This isn't, they don't charge them nothing, but I think the only thing they ask is that you are a regular churchgoer, which I can understand. But there was one particular one that always makes me laugh, was my husband's confirmation, which was December, beginning of December, I think. Can't remember. Yeah, I'm going to say beginning of December. So it was in a small church, a village adjacent to ours, and it just happened to be there because there was more people from that village that were getting confirmed. And there was a little boy, and he was so funny. He kept picking up his little toy cars, but because it was a stone floor, he kept dropping them on the floor. And of course, it was making an absolute racket whilst everyone's trying to be quiet and listen to the bishop. And it was, his mum was getting confirmed, so he could see his mum but couldn't get to her. So he was getting a little bit sort of, oh, but mum's over there kind of attitude. And I'm assuming it was grandma. Was trying to keep him entertained, and he was sort of running up and down the pews, and 90% of the congregation did not care. We didn't mind. We found it quite amusing to have this little boy just giggling. He couldn't have been older than 2-3 years old. But we found it really funny. There were a couple who was just scowling and thinking, no, you're in a church, you must be quiet. Whereas I've got the attitude of, no, church should be open and welcoming, especially if you have children. Surely you should be helping each other out. If a mother turns up, like yourself, Turtle, if you've got a mother that turns up with a child who doesn't want to be in church, you can offer to help. If you don't mind me asking, have you ever had anyone sort of offer to help so that you can take part a bit more?
No, never.
I find that really surprising. We have that quite a lot over here. You still get a few who are like, no, I'm not going to bother helping them. But especially with the larger churches, if you bring your children, then they really don't mind. And I don't know whether it's because I've been lucky to be part of the churches that have, their vicars have got young children themselves, so they both kind of understand that it's not always possible to keep a child sitting still.
People in the congregation, they often come up to me and say, like, it's so wonderful to see your children, and like, you mustn't worry about them making noise. Like, we love to hear them. I mean, they're not like crying or anything. They just like, they're giggling or they're talking. Like, they just have no concept of how much noise they're making, so they'll just play as if they're playing at home, basically. But the older parishioners, which is basically all of them, they love it. It just reminds them of their own kids and their own grandkids. And they just like Birdie said, they will offer to help. So I think that's a great environment to be in. It's a great culture, and I'm really sad to hear that not all churches are like that. And also,
what we have here, instead of people willing to help you with your child, is you have the crying rooms, where you're in a room where the walls are glass, so you can see what's going on, but no one can hear you. So you're basically like exiled from everyone else, like a leper.
Yeah, crying room. That's really I've heard that before, actually. Yeah, but if you think about I don't know about other places, but I imagine that in a pre social media environment, in a time when everything was closed on a Sunday, I really have to think that if you, especially if you had children or small children, or even if you didn't, there wouldn't be much on to compete with going to church anyway. Like, you want to get your kids out of the house, like maybe the weather's not great, there'll be other children there. And even for people who don't have children, like, where else are you going to get the gossip, like, where, like, it's like a social event, right? It's not like it's not the most fun social event you'll ever go to, but it's free, and everyone will be there, or like a large percentage of your social group will be there. So I think that what we think of now as church is a much more kind of stale, maybe like sterilized version. Whereas you can imagine them when everyone went to church and everyone brought their kids, it would be mayhem. And I read this diary entry from it was just an excerpt from this vicar who was touring these like little country churches, and he was sharing stories of the sort of quaint, when everything was less homogenized, like little country churches would have their own way of doing things. And he was describing how vicars would do baptisms in this particular church, but just by spitting in their own hand. Like, they didn't have clean enough. This is like the 1800s, like 1850s. There wouldn't be like a good clean water source to fill the font, or they didn't think it was worth using clean water to fill the font. So the vicar would just spit in his hand to baptize the babies. And like, you can just imagine how like dirty and weird and kind of loud and busy it would have been, 200 years ago. So
yeah, I'm not going to apologize for the comment I just put up, but
that's pretty good.
I
will not be reading it though.
No, let's not read that out. Anybody, if you want to read it, then you're gonna have to watch and pay attention to the stream. No, I find that I completely agree again, and I do think that the whole sort of religious side of going to church, as ridiculous as this may sound, has kind of been lost. So people don't always go to church for religion now. And I think that's why the groups have gotten smaller and smaller, because the 90% of people think, oh, but if I go to church, then I'm going to have to worship God. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to do that. And I think, again, as Turtle was speaking about earlier, these are things that should be taught, that you do have choices. And I do think it's bad that, Turtle, you weren't taught everything you perhaps should have done before stepping into that. But I do, appreciate your courage in doing that, because I would not have the courage to be able to step into a Catholic church. So well done to you. But I do think the whole, I'm not going to mention exactly the name, but let's jump back to 2021. And I think that date alone says enough. And church sermons online and using water pistols for certain things was absolutely ridiculous for a start.
Yeah.
But I think it's ruined church services, because some vicars are incredibly good at giving sermons. They get you involved. They actually talk to you, not at you. And they can be quite light-hearted, and it's not fire and brimstone, and it's not, in your face. And I think a lot of people do feel like church can be quite oppressive and in your face, and no, you have to do this, and if you're going to come to church, then you must act like this. And yeah, it did used to be like that, but I think now it's definitely become a lot more relaxed in some aspects, not in all, as we know. But again, that's something you pick and choose. There's as an example, when I was younger, I did go to the church in the village I grew up in. And at the time, I wore a lot of black. I was a moody teenager. Let's not go any further than that description. A lot of eyeliner was involved. But the vicar, who'd known me since I was born, he's the vicar in the village. He told me that I was the devil's child and that I should not go to church. Now, jump forward, it was only 2 years after that, I am serving this vicar in my local pub. he was a little bit sheepish then, because he suddenly realised that I was serving him his drink, and I thought, hold on a minute. You go back 2 years and you told me I was the devil's child. Now, I don't know why he told me that, whether it was the way I dressed or I honestly do not know to this day. And when because he's still the vicar in the village I grew up in, and I have seen him a few times, and he has never spoken to me since. So I do think there is a lot to be said about sort of picking and choosing your churches. It's okay to go to one church a couple of times and think, actually, no, this doesn't suit me. But I would say don't give up immediately. You know, I used to hate going to church purely because of I was in the wrong environment. I was surrounded by the wrong people in the wrong church. Now I don't mind it so much. You know, I had a church wedding, and as I said, I'm not a devout Christian. I'm not fully religious. I sort of dip my toes in and behave myself when I need to. But
the vicar who married you was a completely different.
She was hilarious.
I'm trying to imagine like what she would have been like calling anyone the devil's child.
Yeah. I mean, she was so funny. I think everybody loved her.
Bertie, I support you going to church in whatever capacity you want to, as little or as much as you want. But to come back to what you said earlier, I really think you should get a blessing.
I have had one.
Like, I feel like I don't know. Like it sounds like maybe those people who told you to go get a blessing just thought you didn't know. Like they just thought
that sounds like a threat, Poe. Just go and get a blessing.
Look, okay, so look, Bertie, if God is not real and the blessing means nothing, then why not just do it? You know, everyone else is doing it.
I will happily admit, Poe, that I had my first ever blessing on Christmas Eve, just gone. So there you go. I have had a blessing.
Look, if you didn't like it, if it makes you uncomfortable, then don't do it. But I feel
it didn't make me uncomfortable. Although I did have over a bottle of wine before I did it, so that may have helped. I think it will be a while until I have a blessing again, because I was rather swaying as I walked up my blessing. But it's a good job that some of them were drinking in the pub with me before we went in there.
So it must have been midnight mass then, was it?
Yes, it was. It was midnight mass.
Good, yeah. No, I went to midnight. Speaking of church, I went to midnight mass this year for the first time in ages, and I was really I was pleasantly surprised by how merry everyone was. Like it seemed like about half of the people there had just come out of the pub, and including like the choir and the choir master and everyone, they were all like quite like not disorderly but just quite merry, and it showed. Like everyone was just being quite silly.
Absolutely. I mean, the midnight mass just gone was a lot quieter than the year before. I mean, the year before, let's say the distance from our pub to the church is less than a 5-minute walk. It is dangerously close. So the year before, we were actually drinking in the pub with the vicar, which made it even funnier. I also worked at his wedding last year, sorry. So yeah, we're all very good friends down here in this small little village. But yes, when you're drinking in the pub with the vicar who's going to do midnight mass, and then you hear somebody else who's going to midnight mass shout for about 5 minutes to 12, thinking, oh shit, we need to get down to the church, and then we all sort of bimble down there in a big crowd. It is rather amusing. This year was sadly very quiet. It did seem very mellow, and I don't know, things just felt heavier than the previous year.
It's been a heavy year, wars.
It has been a heavy year. It's been a heavy year. But I think, that's something else you kind of just have to work with, is that not every church service is going to be the same, regardless of what people say. And it's, they'll say, oh, it's the same few songs and the same psalm and the same hymns and the same order. And yeah, okay, but who are you going to talk to? Who are you going to see that day? Are you going to have a cup of tea afterwards? Are you going to volunteer for something? You don't know what's actually going to happen until you go. And this isn't me advocating saying go to church, by the way. This is me.
I am. Go to church.
Poe will tell you to get a blessing if you don't. She'll threaten you with it.
Get the blessing. Just get the blessing. How hard is it? Just put the hand on your head and say something nice. Like, why would you want that?
because we always kind of joke saying that he goes to church and I don't. And he was reading the Bible again, and he brought up a part that I can't remember what it was because I'm a terrible person and I've never read the Bible all the way through. But he brought up a part saying that because he's my husband, the fact that he goes to church kind of covers me as well.
Yes. Oh, how many times I've sent David to church. Great.
Yeah, that works.
Winning at life. So yeah, I mean, I'm busy. Thing is, I find that in a good way. It sounds bad, but if Alex goes to church and he pulls that one-liner, I feel like I'm obligated to make myself busy in the house. That's my way of sort of repenting. I'm like, oh yeah, but I feel kind of guilty now. I'm gonna go and do something. Not like, oh, it's a chill Sunday, I'm gonna have a lie-in. I'll still have a lie-in, but I'm gonna end up doing stuff in the house because that's kind of my version of a Sunday. Not going to church is, I still need to do something, right?
You worship at home.
I wouldn't put it that far, but let's not make this weird.
But Alex comes home and you're worshipping your pagan idols, and you've got like some goat blood and candles.
Wow.
Wow. No, sorry, I know that's a gross generalization about pagans. That was a
terrible example. That has not been done in a very, very long time. If any of you go wassailing, that's pagan.
We had a wassailing. We were going to talk about pagan stuff and Wiccan and everything. There was a wassail at our village orchard. I did not go to it.
You should. It's great fun. So you're telling me to go and get a blessing. You need to go and wassail.
All right, I'll do it next year.
I'm supposed to be organising a wassail actually for our orchard sometime this week. So that's my job apparently. There's a bit of a running joke in this house. It's a pagan who's married Christian, and it's somehow we haven't exploded into flames. But
actually Christianity, when it came to England, and when Christianity moved around the world, it did pick up a lot of the kind of tropes of paganism. And I actually watched a very interesting video about how Christmas is not a pagan holiday, and that paganism was still being practiced by people at the same time as
it is.
Christians were celebrating Christmas, and it was that just because it's that pagans also do it, it doesn't mean the pagans were doing it first. But all the same, the cherubim and seraphim and all of the stuff that's not strictly in the Bible that are kind of picked up by Christianity, the kind of the decorations and a lot of the music. It is borrowed from other religions that people were practicing at the time because it made it easier to convert them to Christianity. So there is some paganism has slipped into.
Definitely.
Christianity is all I'm saying.
And I think that has kind of just been a crossover, to be honest, in terms of timelines, quite literally just crossing over. But when I say look into it, we might have to do another stream on just paganism and see which rabbit hole we go down with that. But you've got Christmas, but then for me it's the winter solstice. So there's two kind of crossovers there. I do celebrate Christmas as a Christian holiday. I go to midnight mass, we just said, and I go to the carol service, which I really enjoy, and things like that. But when it comes to the pagan side, it's bringing in your evergreens and bringing life to show the new signs of life through winter. You're celebrating the peak of winter, so you're getting through the winter solstice. So even fresh berries and holly and all sorts, there are so many crossovers that you don't have to say oh, I'm doing this because I'm pagan. And I have never once said that because I just do it, and I never once think, oh, this is a pagan thing, because it's just something that we just do. And anybody who's come to our house over the holidays hasn't said anything, because it just looks like a Christmas decoration. It's just a Christmas house. You've got your Christmas tree up, you've got some garlands and candles. What about that?
Your baby Yoda ornament on the top.
No.
Call back to a previous webinar about Christmas.
Yeah, that was my sister's tree. Thank
I know it
you
wasn't yours.
very
I know.
much. No, that's because I made the Baby Yoda for Century. We're gonna have to do that again. We missed that this year. We didn't do the Christmas tree hounding. We're gonna have to, definitely gonna have to do that again this year. She says in January. That's wishing time away.
Turtle, I've been trying to figure out which magic card your profile picture is from, and I think I've seen it. Like it's a white card, and I think it's from what's it, like Exaltation deck. Tell me if I'm getting
I wish I could answer that for you, because when I do my Magic the Gathering streams, David just picks Magic the Gathering artwork and sticks my face on it. So yeah, Dave's responsible for this one.
You must recognize the card though. Like if I recognize it, then I mean maybe I just think I recognize it, but is it not a famous card? You don't know what it is?
It must be. I don't know if it's Ariella or
fake
something.
Fan. You're a fake nerd girl. No, I'm just kidding.
I am not a
more
fake.
Than I have.
I'm not a nerd at all. I just have some nerdish tendencies, like video games and Magic, but I'm not like spurgy into it.
Sorry, I derailed the stream, buddy. You can.
Oh no, that's fine. I've now got in my head of Turtle saying I'm not a Spurg. It's going to go through my head all night now. Jumping back to the actual topic at hand, do we think it is traditional to go to church?
I mean, yeah, if you want to go back to like Anglo-Saxon pagans, like they were probably practicing their religion in a slightly different way, but yeah, you'll have to tell me about going back that far. But I think that what I consider the golden age of our wonderful country was founded on men and women who were all churchgoers for the most part. And I think that was a great thing. And I think that was not a coincidence. Their religion, or even the way that they practiced their culture, let's say, even if not explicitly their religion, really contributed to the greatness of this country at one time, and we would do well to emulate those people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll jump onto you in a moment, Turtle, because I'm sure you've got some comments that probably counter ours in terms of England. But as you say, Poe, it is definitely a cultural thing. I think if you are English, if you are to be English, then the church definitely comes into that 100%. It's just something that's been here for thousands of years. It's not something we've made up on the spot. It's like any country, they've got their own religion. It's the same as this one. We have the Church of England. It's called that for a reason. Turtle.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Do I think it's traditional?
Yes.
I think because especially Canada, where I'm from, has a lot of vestige of English culture. I think we take a lot of comfort in the familiarity of that. I would say, like Dawkins, for example, said that he doesn't go to church, but he's a cultural Christian because he likes the bells and the churches, and and because Canada has a lot of, it's mostly European of heritage. I think it rubbed off here with their music and with going to church and that sort of thing. I think in that way it's kind of traditional to go to church, but it's almost like in North America, because it's so new here, it's almost like we don't really understand why there are a lot of traditions. I don't know how to put it, because I feel like here it's not about, maybe it's just my experience in church, it's not so much about community, and it's not so much about social cohesion to go to church. It's really a matter of choice. And yeah, it's hard to say because I come from such a fresh country, but I would say it's traditional. Yeah.
Would you, in regards to what you just said, would you say it was more actually about the religion itself in terms of going to church, whereas over here I think it's now fallen into more, as you say, going to be a part of a community, being part of a group, and not necessarily pushing on the religion itself?
Yeah, I think here it is more of a religious thing why people go to church, and not so much for the social cohesion of it. But I mean, I worked in the Catholic Church for 10 years. I was a music director for a couple of churches, and the church or any religious community will attract people of all sorts. Nutcases who use the church as sort of a platform for control, people who really do believe, people who are forced to go, you get all sorts of people. So it's difficult to say, what the purpose of the church is. And so many people have come with so many motivations behind themselves. But yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It just all these memories started flooding back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't realize you worked in a church for 10 years, so you must have seen it all, quite literally.
Yeah, I have. Oh boy.
Poe, any further comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how different church can be. Like we're here to talk about church, but then we ended up having like very different, just basic experiences. Like not because of what we bring to it, but just how people react to us and what the actual like different practices are in the across the Anglosphere. You get a lot of different response, which I think it kind of explains why I got so many comments on my video about church from people who just had like vastly divergent experiences to me, even though what I thought I just assumed that what I experienced was very normal. But I guess I've got to do some more research and sort of figure out what church actually means to other people. I also when I really tentatively, when I was like first really into going to church, and I thought it was really great, and I thought everyone should do it. I tried to get one of my mum friends to go because she'd been a few times, and I kind of wanted to like her kids are friends with my kids, and I thought, well, I could just bring her kids to church with me, with my kids, and then they would play like my kids would like that more than to be on their own because there aren't many kids who come to church. But what she said to me was, I think, really said a lot. And she was talking about the like the safeguarding scandal in the UK. Not the capital G, not the Rotherham scandal that we've been talking about recently, but before that, the last biggest child abuse scandal that we had in this country. We're still feeling the aftermath of that, and we had to like yeet our Archbishop of Canterbury from the Church of England because he failed to act when he should have, potentially. I don't know much about that specifically, but I know that, at least talking to this woman, I think that there are a lot of people who lost faith in not in God or Christianity, but they lost, but the church lost its authority. They lost their moral authority. People stopped being able to believe that the church was a force for good, that was full of good people who were like kind. I think Christianity really lives and dies on whether the general public believe that being Christian makes you a better person than being an atheist. And so when people saw how many Christians or people who called themselves Christians, people who are really powerful in the church, failed to act to protect these children, a lot of people lost their faith in the church, and then subsequently, I think, probably lost their faith in God as well. And it was just basically a kind of an earth-shattering, I don't want to say event, but it was an earth-shattering scandal for the church. Bertie, I don't know if that's kind of heavy for the end of the stream, but
well, sorry. I think, in my opinion, if people lose their faith because of the acts of human beings, I don't think their faith was that deep to begin with. But I would say that I've lost a lot of faith in my church for sure, but I'd like to think I still have a lot of faith in God. And it's kind of two different things. The church is run by people. People are flawed, so flawed things are going to happen. But in the teachings, there's nowhere in Catholic teaching saying that it's okay to diddle children. So, I mean, if the church starts teaching that, then yeah, I will definitely, lose my faith, I think. But watching people who say to be Catholic and do terrible things, I mean, this is really kind of run-of-the-mill human nature, human behavior. So you kind of have to separate like the wheat and the chaff when it comes to your faith and sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of not how people form opinions. They're not really logical about it in the way that you are, Turtle. And I think like I'd really like it if people were more they understood that humans are fallible and God is like that's part of humanity. That's not really got to do with how good God is, but I really think people kind of make decisions about what to do and who to hang out with based on more superficial things, where it kind of like in politically, if you see people who are they've got good lives, they wear nice clothes, and they're more attractive, and they've got a happy family, kind of makes you interested in what they're doing and wanting to do that as well. And if you see people who are really bitter and lonely and ugly, it makes you not want to do what they're doing. It's like just really basic. It sounds really stupid. Like how can people be that stupid? But I think that really is almost the level that people operate on subconsciously. And when you see like people in the church doing something bad, you think, oh, you just like associate the church with bad things.
Another thing that's interesting is that even people who don't believe in God or believe in the church still hold the church to a high standard. Like they're still even scandalized if the church does something wrong, even though they themselves don't believe, which is kind of tells me that the church still does have that moral authority, whether or not it's popular.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I don't know if this is true 100%. Like I'm gonna have to fact check myself, but I've heard that the level of abuse that was going on in the church was no more than the average level of abuse going on in like your typical school or scouts group. The like it's terrible to contemplate, but actually these things do happen wherever children are being taken care of by adults, there is abuse, and that like the church, it wasn't happening at the church more than anywhere else. It was just that people were more scandalized that it was happening in church when people, like you say, held the church to a higher standard.
For sure.
Great comments from both of you. I was quite happy just sitting back and listening. Couple of points from what you both said, really. Helen, you said a very good thing of the church is run by people and people have flaws. And, we're supposed to see the church as this perfect thing, this perfect being. But as you said, actually, no, that's not the case. It's the church is run by people and people do have flaws. So it's not going to be perfect. You're supposed to have faith in the being that is being worshipped by the church, right? So I find it very interesting when you said that if people have lost their faith in the church because of what a person has done, then their faith isn't strong enough. I think that's a great thing to say to start off with, but in terms of holding the church in such high regard, church, especially in this country, I can't speak for anywhere else, but in this country, the church comes second, if not in line with the crown. So we're kind of taught from a very young age. Well, I certainly was. I don't know about yourself, Poe. I went to a Church of England primary school, so I was taught from a very young age that we're supposed to respect the church. We're supposed to respect whoever's in charge of the church, and I don't mean respect as in you respect your elders sort of attitude. I mean respect as in no, we hold them in very high regard. They are in charge. Their opinion matters. So I don't know whether that's because if the hierarchy of the church, should we call them, does something scandalous and it would seem like the entire world is rocked. I don't know whether that comes down to the fact that we are taught from a very young age that the church, and again, it goes back in history as well, that the church is in line with the throne. So they hold that level of importance to everybody, and it's the same as if one of the royal family does something mildly wrong, oh no, they were photographed drunk, that is now a scandal apparently, which is ridiculous, because how many people, it's like you were saying, Poe, how many people, it's again, you don't want to think about it, but let's just use the drunken metaphor for now. How many people have stumbled home drunk and have a terrible photo of them on their social media pages? But that's not a scandal. They just had a bit too much to drink. But as soon as somebody of high regard or in a high level of status does that, it's an issue. And are we looking at the people or are we looking at the faith? Because when we say, you're losing faith in the church, you're not losing faith in God. You're losing faith in those people, in the people that run the church, because we have the expectation that if you are religious, then you're supposed to be good and grateful and helpful, and you're supposed to be all these good things. But I've met so many deeply religious people who have been downright horrible and judgy and really judgy. I mean, there's a couple of people in this village who are horrendous and they are very religious. But can I blame that on them?
It sounds more like they worship rules and God is just sort of the vehicle for that.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it. Do we have any last comments before we wrap up for the evening?
To bring it on a slightly lighter note, just to pick up on your drunkenness comment just now, I have found that people who do not go to church and whose parents never took them to church, I'd call them never churchgoers, they have this kind of incorrect, I think, assumption about churchgoers where they think that we are very prudish in all areas of life. So, for example, when there was some, when our school had some leftover cakes from our cake sale on a Saturday, and I said, well, I can just take these to church in the morning if we want to get rid of them. There was so much cake left over. And there was quite a lot of a Guinness cake left over, kind of a big chocolate cake with Guinness. And then someone was like, "Oh, is the church going to want a Guinness cake?" They thought that the churchgoers are so prudish that they don't get drunk like normal people. When actually, I'd say almost I've got the opposite stereotype where I think living a Christian life. I mean, obviously there's Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, and that there are some sects of Christianity that do not permit alcohol. But on the whole, I think there are so few vices that are allowed to Christians that they really like to indulge in their tipples, let's say.
Yes,
and they would definitely not begrudge a Guinness cake. So that kind of made me laugh, and I'd like to dispel that notion if possible.
Yeah, it is very amusing. The particular vicar that I was drinking with before midnight mass, we've also witnessed the exact same vicar polishing off the communion wine, and it wasn't one or two sort of small sips. We went into a hymn, and myself and my husband looked up, and our lovely vicar was necking this goblet of wine. There was quite a few glugs going there. Instead of returning it to the vessel or pouring it away, no, it was.
You can't pour it away. It's consecrated. You can't pour it away.
Yeah, it was being enjoyed, shall we say? It was being enjoyed. It was a Sunday, and he did say he was going home for his Sunday roast afterwards. So I do not begrudge him at all. It was rather amusing, and it lightened my day. So there we go.
The Jolly Heretic has ended the chat. He says they must finish the communion wine. And I just want to say, I'm absolutely delighted that the Jolly Heretic has been watching the stream for 1 minute or however long he's been here for.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to have to go back and watch the rest of it. But thank you for everyone for joining us. We'll call it a wrap there. Fingers crossed we'll have one next week. As always, links are below. Please do follow, like, subscribe, etc. If anyone wants to join the Wamen Hour panel, please pop us a message, and we'll get you on. We're always looking for Wamen with opinions. Don't always have to be bad ones. You don't have to be into politics either. I'm certainly not. So thank you to Poe, thank you Turtle, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. See ya.
Toodle pip.